Less than a day later, the FBI, at my direction, released the first set of images of the suspect that we captured based on our analysis on the ground. Later that evening, while conducting extensive interviews and cell phone analysis, and also flying out evidence response teams and hostage rescue teams and evidence tacticians who were collecting evidence in live time and flying them back to Washington, D.C. in our laboratories for immediate analyses, we were able to extract video from the campus feed. And at my direction at 8 p.m., in partnership and promise to working with the public to bring this fugitive to justice, we released never before seen video of the suspect. We also released new enhanced photos of the suspect. A few hours later, that custody, pursuant to the interrogation of the suspect's own father, who stated, "When I saw that video that you released, I recognized it was my son, and I confronted him, and he was handed over to lawful law enforcement authorities." That is the FBI working with the public, as I promised, being transparent and providing critical information along the way in the manhunt for the suspect and suspects involved in Charlie's assassination.
The official narrative was clean, precise, and designed for public consumption. It spoke of a lone, disturbed individual, a sudden act of violence, and a nation left to mourn the tragic death of a prominent voice, Charlie Kirk. The legal machinery moved with swift, decisive force, charging Tyler Robinson with a litany of counts and presenting a case that seemed, on its surface, unassailable. The story was simple. It was manageable. It was, according to a growing body of evidence and testimony from within the system itself, potentially incomplete, misleading, or worse. Beneath the placid surface of this official account, a furious and clandestine battle was raging, a battle over evidence, over jurisdiction, and ultimately over the truth itself. This conflict pits those seeking to follow the investigation wherever it may lead against the most powerful law enforcement and intelligence agencies in the world, agencies that appear determined to block certain paths of inquiry at every turn. At the heart of this struggle are two figures operating in a unique capacity: former Representative Tulsi Gabbard and her aide, former Congressman Joe Kent. Their attempts to conduct legitimate counterterrorism oversight in the wake of the Kirk assassination have run into a wall of resistance so formidable and so opaque that it has sparked a profound crisis of confidence and allegations of a cover-up at the highest levels of the American government. The mission, as initially conceived, was one of due diligence. In the chaotic aftermath of the killing, unanswered questions festered. Gabbard and Kent, leveraging their positions and national security credentials, sought to ensure that no stone was left unturned, particularly regarding the persistent, unsettling rumors of possible foreign involvement. This was not a rogue operation. It involved accessing FBI files and case materials through established, albeit sensitive, channels of congressional oversight. Their inquiry was predicated on a simple, powerful principle: in a matter of such national significance, every lead must be pursued, no matter how politically inconvenient the destination. Joe Kent's review began with a methodical examination of the digital and physical evidence gathered by the FBI. But as his inquiry began to pivot towards specific, sensitive areas, potential international financial flows, communications intercepts, and the possible links between the accused and networks outside the United States, the access that had been granted began to constrict. The resistance he encountered was not from low-level bureaucrats, but from the very top of the Bureau. According to multiple sources familiar with the internal dynamics, FBI Director Kash Patel became personally involved in resisting and limiting Kent's review. The reasons provided were consistently framed in the language of procedural integrity. Officials argued that congressional interference could jeopardize the ongoing prosecution of Tyler Robinson. They expressed concern that revealing sources and methods, or even the specific directions of the investigation, could compromise a carefully built legal strategy. On the surface, these were reasonable professional cautions. But the intensity and the high-level nature of the pushback suggested something more than mere bureaucratic risk aversion. It felt, to those on the receiving end, like a deliberate and calculated campaign of obstruction. Doors that were once slightly ajar were now being firmly shut and locked. Requests for specific documents were met with delays, heavily redacted files, or outright denials. The question became unavoidable. What was contained within those files that warranted such direct protection from the director of the FBI? The tension erupted in a closed-door, high-stakes meeting at the White House. The room was a pressure cooker of conflicting agendas. On one side, Gabbard and Kent pressed their case for full transparency, arguing that a comprehensive understanding of any external links was a national security imperative that transcended a domestic prosecution. Arrayed against them were Director Patel and other senior administration officials who delivered stern, unambiguous warnings. They reportedly cautioned that Kent's continued inquiries were a direct threat to the viability of the case against Robinson. The subtext, as perceived by attendees, was chilling. Stand down, or be held responsible for collapsing the entire legal effort. This was no longer a debate over policy. It had the feeling of a confrontation, where the pursuit of a wider truth was being framed as a destructive act. While this drama unfolded behind the sealed doors of the West Wing, the public face of the investigation presented a picture of seamless efficiency. State prosecutors publicly laid out their charges against Tyler Robinson, confidently reiterating the lone actor narrative. The message to the American people was one of resolution and forward momentum. Yet, simultaneously, a parallel process was occurring deep within the investigative apparatus. Critics and knowledgeable observers began to note a disturbing pattern: the rapid and total centralization of all evidence with the FBI. Local law enforcement, typically responsible for key aspects of a criminal investigation, saw their roles curiously diminished. Evidence control, forensic analysis, and the custodial chain of every critical piece of the puzzle were funneled into the Bureau's hands. This consolidation of power meant that the entire factual foundation of the case resided with a single entity, the very same entity that was actively blocking a congressional counterterrorism inquiry into that very case. This created an impossible paradox. How could the public have confidence in a lone actor narrative when the agency controlling all the evidence was simultaneously preventing a legitimate oversight body from verifying that very conclusion? This contradiction fueled the most volatile theory taking root among national security experts and public figures. They contend that the obstruction is not about protecting a prosecution, but about containing a geopolitical explosion. The real fear, according to this view, is that a thorough, unimpeded investigation would uncover clear and compelling links to a foreign state actor. Such a revelation would trigger diplomatic crises, force retaliatory measures, and upend international relations. The cover-up, in this scenario, is not to protect the guilty, but to prevent a truth deemed too dangerous for the public to know and for the government to confront. The systematic obstruction by the FBI, therefore, is framed not as malfeasance, but as a cold, calculated containment strategy ordered from the highest levels of the administration. In the midst of this maelstrom, a public statement was issued, a joint communiqué from Director Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard. It was a study in political theater, a performance of unity designed to project calm and control. The language was vapid, speaking of shared commitments and ongoing, productive dialogue, while being meticulously crafted to reveal nothing of substance. For those who knew of the bitter clashes occurring privately, this statement was the most damning evidence of all. It was a signal that the system was closing ranks, that the internal conflict would be hidden behind a bland, unified front, and that the official narrative, however fragile, would be defended at all costs. The friction between agencies, the restricted access for investigators, the centralization of evidence, and the stark warnings from the White House, when woven together, they form a tapestry of profound and justified suspicion. The actions of the institutions tell a far more compelling story than their public statements. They tell a story of control, of compartmentalization, and of a narrative that must be protected from scrutiny. The American people are left with a disquieting choice: to trust the neat, simple story presented by the prosecution, or to trust the instincts of those who have seen the walls go up and have felt the pressure to look away. The evidence remains locked away, the gates are guarded, and the gatekeepers stand firm. But the questions they have raised through their resistance are now part of the permanent record, and they will not simply fade away.